everybody. This is Jeremy Martin from Cinco Medicos, and in this video I want to talk a little bit about relationships. How do we know if a relationship is healthy, and how can we improve our relationships? How do we know if it's time to move on from a relationship, and how can plant medicine help us to build healthier relationships or move on from relationships that are toxic or no longer serving us? And the reason I picked this topic for a video is because a lot of people come to me either in the intake process or during ceremony asking these very questions. And what I say, or how I begin, is that relationships, just by their very nature, are incredibly challenging. That is part of the purpose that they serve. They are constantly calling on us to create, to express, to experience higher and higher versions and aspects of ourselves, to allow us to create a bigger vision of who we want to be and what we want to do. And so nowhere can we do this better, more immediately and meaningfully than a relationship. So in fact, without relationships to anything, we can't do it at all, because we just don't exist. I don't exist without anybody else who can see me, hear me, know that I'm here. I can't exist without my environment, and so on. And so as a result, relationships, in the broadest sense of the term, are used to create who we truly are. And we can create who we are either consciously or unconsciously, actively or passively. We can design what kinds of relationships that we desire, or we can just be passive about it and let it happen by its own accord. And so whether that be our partner or our pet, our employer or our friends, it could be our country, it could be technology, anything really, how we relate to something and our level of awareness to how we relate to it is huge in whether that relationship becomes healthy or toxic. So we can create who we are consciously by thinking about who we want to be, thinking about what we want to do, and feeling if who we are now and what we're doing now serves us, really feeling that. And we can let that just happen, again, more unconsciously without much awareness, but usually that's when the relationships begin to falter. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. That can just be a sign to us that the relationship is causing us to become more aware of these types of things. So why do relationships fail? And I put that in air quotes because a lot of people enter relationships with an eye towards what they can get out of a relationship. And when they don't get something out of the relationship with that expectation, they think, oh, well, this is a failure. I'm a failure. Something went wrong. And how do I make it right? What do I do to fix this? But the whole purpose of a relationship is to decide what kind of part of yourself you want to show up, not what part of someone else that you can force to show up, and then so that you can capture and hold that and tie them down so that they become a prisoner. And you've probably been on the receiving and the giving end, I'm imagining, just if you're a human being. So again, this notion applies to any relationship. Does your relationship to, say, social media allow you to share your passions, your interests, your curiosities, your personality, your values? Or does it, again, capture and hold you prisoner to just endless scrolling? Maybe it's some kind of jealousy or fear of missing out. It could be a boss or a teacher that really empowers you to speak your truth and help others and apply the skills that you have both innately and have developed over the years. Or maybe they just tell you what to do, and they tell you what to think, they tell you how to feel, and tell you what to say without really any room for creativity or for growth. And this, to me, in my own experience, and I'm not a relationship expert, so slight disclaimer there, perhaps the most common thing I hear from people who are struggling with their relationships and wanting to improve them is that they're afraid that they're going to disappoint the other person. And this to me signals codependency, not wanting to let the other down, having to try very hard to be someone else, to think a certain way so that the other person will like or approve of you. If I just do this thing or or I sign this document, or if I just go to this place, or I hang out with these people, well, then I can please them, and then I get love. Um, and we do this until, well, we can't anymore. And ultimately, a lot of people, most people, get really tired, really frustrated, really upset, bitter, and eventually pretty angry, um, because they can't be this false version that the other person wants or is projecting onto you or the individual in this case. So they're sick of playing the roles to which they've been assigned, and whether that's breadwinner, rescuer, the good son, you can fill in the blanks and create your own archetypes here, but we're all pretty familiar with what kinds of roles exist. But eventually, some come to feel, often without really ever being aware of it, that whatever they do, they just can't please the other person. Whoever they are, it never really makes the other person happy or fulfilled. It only really temporarily satisfies the appetite, kind of like junk food. And it's not really love either, it's just conditional approval. And so they come to me or to ceremony after we've talked, feeling really drained and really confused. Maybe they're burnt out from a relationship, and sometimes often feeling very guilty too, as if again they failed. They wondered, where did it go wrong? How can I make this right? I've sacrificed so much, for this other person. I love this other person. We've spent years together. We were married. We had children. We have a house. And perhaps they gave up on their biggest dream, say to start a business or build something that they love so that they could raise children and buy a home or move somewhere. Or perhaps they've settled for less, and they've compromised. And that's not to say that we can't occasionally do this, but they've really gotten along to play along, and they've really abdicated who they truly are, to the extent that they didn't want to upset the other person. They wanted to please the other person. And yet here they are in the kitchen having petty arguments, feeling as if their existence is really mundane and mediocre. And even beyond that, totally meaningless. They're like, what's the point in being in this relationship? Sometimes a relationship can feel really one-sided, and even emotionally destructive and or abusive. And oftentimes one person or both is enabling that self-destructive behavior. It could be addiction, it could be poor mental health, poor self-care, immaturity, irresponsibility, underachievement. The list really goes on. And what people oftentimes do, looking back on the relationship, how it started, and they start to take stock and say, well, it didn't used to be this way. We started off, we had great sex, we loved going on dates, or we had all the same friends, whatever. So what happened? And many people say, again, I was really generous with my time, with my money, with my energy and attention. So what gives here? And again, such patterns are very typical of codependency, which is just a chronic neglect of ourself at its root, at its core. And that chronic neglect of self we learned often in childhood, not necessarily, but often, so that we could gain validation and approval and feel love or its closest ally or cousin. Now, I'm again not a psychologist, and I'm not going to go into the root causes or the dynamics of codependency here. Plenty's been written on that subject, and millions have spent years in therapy trying to fix dysfunctional relationships. That's not the whole point of this video. And other people have wasted precious time and conversations with their best friends, wondering, why won't my partner change, or why does this friend do that? And much of this is just playing out a lot of the same old scripts that we learned in childhood. We're kind of playing into the same game. And ultimately, we come to the very simple realization that you can't fix anyone, nor should you try. If you fear abandonment and separation, those are the fears that only you and you alone can take responsibility for. And that is a good, in the biz we call segue to medicine work. I'm kidding. a lot of people come to ceremony at the end of their rope, and I don't say that lightly. You know, some people are in the midst of a divorce or considering separation. Maybe they're struggling with a partner who's um, struggling with addiction or something like that, and maybe couples counseling hasn't made a dent. Maybe therapy hasn't really helped. And you can take plenty of deep breaths, but that really doesn't change the nature of the situation. And so I respect and honor the gravity of those types of situations. But what really does need to change is our unconscious and conscious thinking, which, frankly, in my opinion, modern psychology's top-down approach doesn't really scratch the surface of. You can talk yourself blue in the face about these things and hear all the bromides and niceties from someone else, but ultimately you're not really getting to the root of the root of the root, because these medicines go much deeper. They can help us, not necessarily, but they can help us to truly feel what we need to feel. If we're ready to feel that and we're willing and not resisting that, we can come to see these behaviors more clearly, both ourselves, our own behavior, and those of another, and with also a playful sense of wonder and curiosity, and often without judgment and criticism of ourselves and other people. In fact, we feel like great compassion, understanding the other person, where they're coming from, why they acted the way they acted, and we can choose on our end to clean up our side of the street. We can amend how we choose to act and respond. We can make healthier choices if that's our wish, and through this process with the medicine, many come to understand through the work, because you are a fundamental part of this. The medicine's not going to do the work for you, but they come to understand in a much more natural way, with far less striving and far fewer appointments, that they didn't do anything wrong, and that whatever does happen or did happen, it's deeply okay. It's all part of a beautiful process of learning and of experiencing the ups and downs of this human, what we term life. And if you need to file for divorce, if you may understand why. If you need to express something, you know how. You may need to practice that with someone like me, and that's what ceremony is for. But really, in short, what people start to claim are their real selves, and they start acting in more accordance and alignment with who they really are, and this gives them a tremendous sense of freedom and liberty, as if they can finally breathe and they don't have to take those deep breaths that I was talking about earlier. They don't have to try to improve and strive to make these right relationships. What ends up happening is that once they change, they start attracting the right people who respond to that energy. And I don't mean that in a woo-woo, new agey kind of way. It just is true. The relationships that aren't working will just kind of fall away, kind of like a leaf. It's going to decay over the winter time. That's just what happens. And once a person deepens the relationship with themselves, their relationships again automatically begin to improve as a natural byproduct. It doesn't have to be something that we make happen. It just happens. And that brings me to the final point of this video, which is integration. Integrating this wisdom can be very challenging. We can realize something in ceremony, but it's one thing to do that, and quite another to take it into our own lives and actually practice it. So when we go back to work, or when we find ourselves home again, chatting with friends or family, we may often hear hurtful things, or things that make integration much more difficult, like, wow, you've really changed, or as if that's a bad thing, or maybe they comment on how they no longer recognize you, or they miss the old you, something to that effect. And that is actually strikingly honest and strikingly true. So we shouldn't take umbrage when we hear things like that. It may feel hurtful, but what's happened is that they've seen the delta. They've seen the difference between the actor that you were playing before and the real self that you are now and becoming. And that you've shed that character, and that makes them feel uncomfortable. They feel a little triggered by that, and they can either choose to accept the new version that you've chosen to create, or they can resist that. And it's really their turn to accommodate the change, to accept you for who you're consciously becoming, or to really just disappear in your life. And I don't mean that with any malice. I just mean that respectfully. If they can't accept you for who you are, do you really want that person in your life? And so part of the integration process is reminding oneself that it is impossible to make the other person feel complete. That's not the point of a relationship. And it's part of a cultural myth when we say things like, you complete me, or you're my better half, and you're my soulmate, and I do anything for you. And while such terms of endearment are sweet and they sound good, we know that at the real root, the sentiment is incorrect in its supposition that a relationship is meant to please another person and that another person can complete you, when that is far, far, far from the truth. We know that the true purpose of a relationship, a healthy one at least, is to have another person with whom you can share your completeness. So when you feel that sense of freedom, you feel that sense of who you truly are, to have someone there to bear witness to that, with whom you can share that. Using my wife as an example, I want her to feel whole and complete, but I can't do that for her. And I want to feel whole and complete and share that with her. We have a healthy relationship. Whenever that falters, well, then that's a sign for each of us to look at our own stuff and to realign and come back into accordance with that. And that's how a healthy relationship is maintained and balanced. And after a while, we even really begin to marvel at the divine paradox of all human relationships, especially in that we have no need for someone else to feel whole, or for us to fully experience who we are. And yet, paradoxically, we are nothing without that other person, because we only exist in relation to everything else, to everyone else. And I'll leave you with that, since this video is getting a little bit long, but thanks for watching to the end, and I appreciate all you. If you want to get in touch with me, feel free to email me at cinco.medicos@protonmail.com, visit my website at cincomedicos.com, or just hang out and enjoy your life. All right, peace.